An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
Ah, there's Kiku.
Let's make it around.
In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. You can either do this directly or through Great Tree, and we will pass it on to them.
And a quick note about the dana, please see in the chat. That's where dana can be sent this morning.
Thank you. And this morning's speaker is Reverend Dr. Wakoh Shannon Hickey, and she is a professional interfaith chaplain who serves hospice patients in Northern California. She has practiced Sōtō Zen Buddhism for more than 40 years and has been an ordained priest in that tradition since 2003. She was the first Buddhist chaplain at Duke University, where she completed a PhD in religious studies and was a Buddhist campus minister at Johns Hopkins University while teaching at a Catholic university in Baltimore. Wakoh grew up in the Napa Valley and attended college at UC Berkeley and seminary at Pacific School of Religion. Her first career was in journalism. As a scholar, she has specialized in North American religious history, Buddhism in Asia and the West, religion and medicine, and interfaith engagement. She is the author of Mind Cure: How Meditation Became Medicine from Oxford University Press, 2019, and is a certified leader of InterPlay. She is a candidate for the Unitarian Universalist ministry as well. This morning's Dharma talk is entitled Badass Women in History.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and for the invitation to speak. This talk arose out of a sermon that I was asked to give at a local Methodist church. And so part of my comments this morning are written. I'm going to be reading partly, and so I won't be looking directly at the camera. I apologize for that. And then part of it is kind of improvised. So here we go. So I'm part of a group of an interfaith group of religious leaders in Napa. And one of them, the Methodist minister, asked me to preach at one point on a particular passage from the biblical book of Numbers. So it's from Numbers chapter 27, verses 1 to 11. I'm going to read those to you. Then the daughters of Zelophehad came forward. Zelophehad was the son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of his daughters were Mala, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the congregation of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the congregation of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers. Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they are saying. You shall indeed let them possess an inheritance among their father's brothers and pass the inheritance of their father on to them. You shall also speak to the Israelites, saying, If a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance on to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it, and it shall be for the Israelites as a statute and ordinance, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, I've got to say, when I first read this, I was pretty skeptical. I was wondering what I could possibly have to say about this story involving some sisters' inheritance rights in one of the more tedious books of the Bible. If you're not familiar with the book of Numbers, it's about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years after escaping slavery in Egypt and receiving God's law at Mount Sinai. At the end of the book, the Israelites have formed an army and they're getting ready to conquer the promised land, which was occupied at the time by Canaanites and other people. So I'm trying to figure out what to say about this passage. I went first to Bible commentaries written by feminist Christian women. They pointed out that the five sisters were incredibly bold to demand property rights in the holiest spot in their community, at the entrance to the tent of meeting, where the stone tablets containing the 10 Commandments were kept in the Ark of the Covenant, and the worship of God was led by male priests. God backed the women up unequivocally. God said their demand was just and allowed them to inherit their dead father Zelophehad's land in the absence of any direct male descendants. But the overall goal, the commentator noted, was to preserve his name and legacy, not their own. But the story doesn't end there. 9 chapters later, at the end of the book of Numbers, the sisters, uncles, and male cousins complain to Moses that if the women marry outside the tribe of Manasseh, their land will pass to their husbands' tribes. So without consulting God, Moses declares that the sisters must marry within the tribe. They agree to marry some of their cousins. So patriarchy wins again. But the story doesn't end there either. I started looking at commentaries by women rabbis and realized these 5 sisters, Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah, were some really badass women. They lived in a society that treated them as chattel property. They belonged first to their fathers, who would sell them off to their husbands, and if their husbands died, they would be married off to their brothers-in-law. If they had none or lived long enough to become widows again, they would become the responsibility of their sons, assuming they had sons. The daughters of the late Zelophehad were unmarried and had no brothers. Under those conditions, they were destitute and completely dependent on the generosity of other men for survival. Given how many times the Bible reminds men to care for widows and orphans, we can infer that dignified, non-exploitive survival was by no means guaranteed. So the sisters leave their tent unbidden and confront Moses, the chief priest, and other male leaders in the most public way possible, in the presence of all the congregation, in the community's most sacred place. And they didn't ask nicely, they demanded, give to us a possession among our father's brothers. They made an argument that was compelling for their audience because they understood Jewish law and tradition. Their father had not participated in an earlier rebellion against Moses' authority, and the continuity of a family's name depended on its owning land. Moses wasn't sure what to do about this, and so he consulted God. And not only did God agree that their request was just, God made it a hereditary right. Women could own land and pass it down to their heirs in such circumstances. This is the only time in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible, where a law is proposed by humans, then ratified and extended by God. The sisters' bold action benefited themselves, their extended family, and all similarly situated women who would come after them, regardless of their tribe. The last part of their story comes in Joshua 17, chapter 17, when they actually take possession of their share of the land given to the tribe of Manasseh. And the tribal territory was no small plot. I looked at ancient and contemporary maps and found that it encompassed what is today almost all of northern Israel and the west bank of the Jordan, and a sizable chunk east of the Jordan in what is now the country of Jordan, around its capital, Amman. Although most women in the Bible are nameless, these sisters appear in 3 separate stories, and in every case, they are mentioned together by name. That means they were a very big deal. Each of their names became the name of a place or region in their ancient tribal territory, according to other parts of the Bible or archaeological evidence. For a time, Tirzah was a royal city. So by working together collectively and boldly, they changed history forever. Now, you may be wondering why I'm talking about this Bible story. My Christian colleague who asked me to talk about these women also asked me to talk about comparable stories in Buddhist history. There are quite a few, but I decided to focus on the first. It's the story of Mahapajapati Gotami, the Buddha's aunt and foster mother, who founded the order of Buddhist nuns. How many of you have actually heard of Mahapajapati? Good. Okay. So she was the younger sister of Maya, the mother of Siddhartha, who became the Shakyamuni Buddha, whose teachings we practice. Their mother, the mother of Maya and Gotami, was Lumbini, for whom the garden where Siddhartha was born was named. It was a place specifically reserved for women to give birth, apparently. Both of the sisters were married to King Suddhodana of the Shakya clan. Interestingly, one of the miracle stories about Siddhartha is that he was miraculously conceived without the participation of his father. So, interesting little parallel there to a famous Christian story. Maya died a week after her son was born, so Gotami, who was also pregnant, decided to raise her nephew. She then gave birth to her own son, Nanda, and her daughter, Sundari Nanda, and the cousins grew up together in luxury. You probably know that Siddhartha married Yasodhara when he was 29, and they had a son, Rahula. But he was struggling mightily with the meaning of suffering, sickness, aging, and death. So, like many young men of his time, he left his family, possessions, and social status behind and became a wandering seeker after spiritual truth. Some stories say that Mahapajapati went blind with grief. Now, some of what I am saying about Mahapajapati comes from a very interesting new book called The Woman Who Raised the Buddha, which I recommend to you. It's a very dense, sort of scholarly book in which Wendy Garling goes and does incredible research across different Buddhist traditions, texts, different cultures, different languages, and compiles quite an amazing sort of biography of Mahapajapati. So I recommend that to you. So back to the story. After 6 years of very intensive meditation and brutal practices designed to drive out physical desire, near starvation, etc., he finally settles on the middle way between the extremes of self-indulgence and self-denial, experienced enlightenment, and became a Buddha. As he taught other people what he had realized, he gradually gathered a community of disciples. These were other men who left everything behind to follow him. They survived by living exemplary lives and spreading the Buddha's teachings, and they were supported by lay people who, as you heard in the discussion of Donna, donated food, clothing, medicine, and shelter to the monastic community. So eventually, the Buddha wanders back to his hometown of Kapilavastu. He miraculously restores his foster mother's eyesight, and and begins to teach there. At first, women were not allowed to hear him teach, but a group of them insisted that they wanted to hear his teachings. So they made an arrangement where he would teach the men in the morning and the women in the afternoon. King Suddhodana, Queen Gotami, and the Buddha's cousins Nanda and Ananda, and his half-sister Sundari Nanda, his wife Yasodhara, and his son Rahula all converted to his teachings and became lay followers. So did a group of 500 other women led by Gotami, who at that point became known as Pajapati, or mother of a great child. So Maha Pajapati means great mother of a great child. Eventually, the Buddha's male cousins decided to become monks, and then King Suddhodana died. This left Maha Pajapati and the Buddha's wife and half-sister in very dire straits, like the women in the Bible story. They were the property of men, first their fathers, then their husbands, then their sons or other male guardians. Their rights were extremely limited, and if they had no male supporters, they were destitute. So Pajapati and these 500 other women, lay followers of the Buddha, asked Siddhartha to admit women to his monastic order as nuns, and he refused. After that, he left Kapilavastu and traveled about 150 miles to Vaishali, where he stopped to teach. Meanwhile, many of the other 500 women followers, whose husbands, sons, brothers, and uncles had either left to follow the Buddha or died in war, went to Maha Pajapati for help. So she gathered these 500 women, and they all shaved their heads like the monks and donned the robes of the Buddha's followers and walked barefoot to the gates of Vaishali. There, they asked again, publicly, like the women in the Bible story, publicly, 500 of them, they asked the Buddha for ordination, and he refused again. Eventually, the Buddha's cousin and attendant, Ananda, went to see these women and found Pajapati, Maha Pajapati, at the head of the group, dirty, in rags, and covered with sores from walking. When she explained that the women wanted to join the Buddha's monastic community and he'd refused twice, Ananda went to him and asked on their behalf. He refused. So Ananda tried another tack. She's your foster mother, he said. She raised you as her own child. He still refused. He'd already stirred things up by gathering a large following of men whose seniority was determined by their ordination date, not by their social class. This was a big deal in ancient Indian society. The community depended on the generosity of donors for survival, so they really had to be above reproach. Ananda asked, "Are you refusing because women are incapable of becoming enlightened?" "No, they can become enlightened," the Buddha said. "So what's your problem, dude?" Ananda asked. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. The Buddha finally relented and let the women join on the condition that they accept a series of rules that thoroughly subordinated them to the monks. For example, even the most senior nun had to bow to the most junior monk, and monks were not allowed to bow to nuns. Women had to be ordained by both monks and nuns. Their gatherings had to be supervised by monks, and they could not criticize the monks or teach them, even though the monks were obliged to teach them and free to criticize them. Mahapajapati accepted these rules, and the women's monastic order was founded. But because of these rules, supporting nuns was seen as less prestigious than supporting monks. And in some places in Buddhist Asia, the nuns' order eventually died out. In Southeast Asia, in the Theravada tradition, it died out completely, although in the last couple of decades, it's been restored by some sort of fringy monks who support the women. In other places, the order continues to struggle. In modern Taiwan, interestingly, Buddhist nuns vastly outnumber monks. Now, we could say in this story that I've just told you about Mahapajapati, patriarchy ultimately wins, just as it did in the book of Numbers. But let's dig a little deeper. In both stories, women gather their collective strength to confront an unjust situation that threatens their very lives. In the Buddhist story, they enlist a male ally, and they all get what they insist on having, even though they must accept some restrictions in the process. For Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milka, and Tirza, owning land meant economic survival. That kind of self-sufficiency was unheard of in their day. In the Buddhist story, the men had renounced their claims to land and property, and the women they left behind could not possess or control it. So the only route available to social and economic security for Pajapati and her community of women was to become nuns. This would give them access to food, clothing, medicine, and shelter so that they could devote themselves to spiritual practice and study. So there are both practical and spiritual reasons for their wanting to become nuns. Some of them became teachers and religious leaders. The Buddhist scriptures contain a book that is unique in world religious literature, the Therigatha, or the songs of fully enlightened nuns, including those of Mahapajapati, her daughter Sundarinanda, and several other women who lived in Suddhodana's palace, some of whom may have been the concubines of Siddhartha before he became the Buddha, excuse me. So how many of you are familiar with the Therigatha? Okay. Well then, let me share a little bit of it with you. Make sure I'm on the right page here. All righty. Okay. This website that I'm showing you now, can you see it? Okay. It is called Access to Insight. Access to Insight. And I highly recommend this site. It's a wonderful compendium of translations and commentaries on many of the texts, not all, but many, many of the texts in the Pali Canon. So the Therigatha is the verses of the elder nuns. Teri means elder nuns, and Gata means songs or verses, and they're organized by length. So I'm just going to show you a couple of them. This one's kind of fun. This is Sumangala's mother. So she doesn't have her own name. She's somebody's mother. She says, so freed, so thoroughly freed am I from my pestle, my shameless husband and his sunshade making, my moldy old pot with its water snake smell. Aversion and passion I cut with a chop. Having come to the foot of a tree, I do jhana or meditation from the bliss thinking, what bliss? So that's one example. And I want to just show you a couple of them because I want to give you a sense of the contrast between the tone and the topics of the women's poems and those of the men. There's a similar book that is the verses of the elder monks. So, for example, in Ubiri's verses, she speaks about her daughter. Jiva, my daughter, you cry in the woods. Come to your senses, Ubiri. 84,000, all named Jiva, have been burned in that charnel ground. For which of them do you grieve? Pulling out, completely out, the arrow so hard to see, embedded in my heart, he expelled from me, overcome with grief, the grief over my daughter. Today, with my arrow removed, without hunger, entirely unbound, to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha I go, for refuge to the sage. Now, some of you may be, let me go back here. Some of you may be familiar with do you chant the women's lineage in your Sangha?
We have it. We don't chant it regularly.
Okay. Well, most of the women who are in that list are the women who are named in the Therigatha. That's where their names come from. Okay. So I just wanted to mention that. It's worth looking up. Mm-hmm. So the women are talking about being free from their husbands, from domestic labor, from the grief over the death of their children. Here's one by Adakasi, who had been a prostitute. All of the Kasi countryside, my fee was equal to that. Having made that my price, the town set me as priceless in price. But then I became disenchanted with my body, and disenchanted, dispassionate. May I not run again and again through birth and the wandering on. 3 knowledges have been realized, the Buddha's bidding done. There are a number of these poems in which women speak disparagingly about their bodies, which is very interesting. And if we go to the comparable list of the verses of the elder monks, the tone is kind of different. So Subhuti says, my hut is roofed, comfortable, free of drafts, my mind well-centered, set free. I remain ardent. So reign, Deva, go ahead and reign. And many of the poems have kind of themes of victory and kind of confidence. And let's see if I can find another one here. Here's Sumangala, who's also freed from 3 crooked things, my sickles, my shovels, my plows. Even if they were here, right here, I'd be done with them. Meditate, Sumangala. Meditate, Sumangala. Sumangala, stay heedful. So the topics and the tone, as I say, in the women's verses are different from the men's verses. And it's worth spending some time looking through these and kind of studying them. So I just want to kind of bring that to your attention. So I'm stop sharing now. So viewed through kind of a contemporary feminist lens, there are reasons to critique the Bible story, the stories about Pajapati, the literature, and the kind of issues in the scriptures, in the Buddhist scriptures, the Therigatha and Therigatha. But the point that I want to make here is that the stories that I'm sharing here with you are stories about women who really acted boldly and collectively. And they made life better for themselves and for everybody who came after them. Now, progress in civil rights has always been incremental, and it has always faced backlash from people who are alarmed by those advances. I don't know if you know this, but white women across the United States gained the right to vote in 1920, but Black women didn't gain it until 1965 when the Voting Rights Act passed. Women in Switzerland didn't get the vote until 1971. So every effort to secure those rights was met by fierce and sometimes violent backlash. And we are, of course, experiencing backlash today. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But I want to mention, because I have a little bit more time than I did in my sermon in the Methodist Church, three other badass women in Buddhist history. One of them is Maylie Scott, who was the sort of teacher of my heart, who died in 2001. There's a story about her in this book, which is also, I commend to you. It's called The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women. It's an incredible compendium of commentaries on stories about women by a whole bunch of really badass contemporary women teachers. And there's a story about Maylie in here. She started out at Berkeley Zen Center, and she was one of the first people ordained by Sojun Mel Weitzman. She was the pillar of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, and she used to lead meditation on the railroad tracks leading into and out of the Concord Naval Weapons Station, where nuclear weapons were transported in and out. And she led these weekly meditation sort of retreats, gatherings on the railroad tracks until the first Iraq War, when people literally started shooting at them. And she later became the teacher of the Arcata Zen Center. She died in 2001, just as I was finishing my master's thesis at the Pacific School of Religion. Another really badass woman, whose book I don't have handy, is Jan Willis. Are you familiar with, anybody know Jan Willis? Recognize that name? She wrote a wonderful memoir called Dreaming Me. She's the first African-American teacher of Sanskrit and Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, in the West. And she taught at Wesleyan University for many, many years. And she started out, she was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and she got a scholarship to go to Columbia University. And when she got there, the Black Power movement was just beginning. And there was a protest at Columbia where Black students took over an administration building, and there was a lot of conflict. It was a big, huge conflict. And Jan realized that she faced a choice. She was trying to figure out whether she was going to go to Oakland and join the Black Panther Party and be engaged in radical politics, or whether she was going to go back to Nepal, where she had spent a semester abroad, and study Buddhism. So she went back to Nepal, studied Buddhism, had very profound experiences, and then came back as a teacher of Buddhism and Sanskrit in the West. And her memoir is one of the most moving and inspiring books I've ever read. So Dreaming Me is the title of it. And I want to commend it to you. And a third is Rita Gross, who was a pioneering scholar, feminist scholar of Buddhism. Her first book was called Buddhism After Patriarchy. And it was relatively new when I was doing my doctorate at Duke. And I remember how kind of condescending my male teachers were about the scholarship that she did, in part because she was trying to excavate from the Buddhist teachings and from Buddhist literature, stories about women to create kind of a usable past for women. And she was, when I first met her, she was really pissed off. She was a kind of an angry woman, and I can relate to that. And over the years that I knew her, she really kind of mellowed and softened, but she had an incredible critical intelligence. She was a brilliant writer, a brilliant, brilliant scholar. And one of her books is called A Garland of Feminist Reflections, 40 Years of Religious Exploration. And in this book is an essay that has been incredibly inspiring to me called The Clarity in the Anger. And she talks about the fact that Buddhists, many Buddhists that she knew, resisted getting involved in any kind of political activity because they said it was dualistic. And the real work of the Buddha Dharma is individual transformation. The Buddha himself was not particularly interested in social transformation. And in my experience, most Buddhist communities tend not to be engaged a lot in kind of political activity. And I remember when I was doing interfaith organizing, how hard it was to get members of local Buddhist sanghas to actually join our various efforts. So what Rita talked about was that Buddhist ethics require that we try to reduce harm, right? The harm caused by various injustices. And what she learned about anger was that there is an enlightened aspect of anger. In the Tibetan tradition, all of the so-called afflictive emotions like anger and lust and greed and those things have an enlightened aspect that appears when the ego is kind of removed from the picture. So the enlightened aspect of anger is clear seeing, clear discernment, the ability to really recognize when something is amiss. And when the heat energy of the anger can be released, that clear seeing is what is necessary for change to come about. Now we have to balance it, with equanimity and acceptance of the things that we cannot change. But I find her analysis of anger and why Buddhists ought to be engaged in politics, in political activity, really, really helpful. So again, A Garland of Feminist Reflections, and the book is, the particular essay is called The Clarity in the Anger. I highly, highly recommend that. And in fact, I have a copy of it that I can email if you'd like to read it. So now we are experiencing quite a backlash against women and a retrenchment. Also immigrants, of course. Women have lost the right in many states to have abortions, even if their health is at risk or there are survivors of rape or incest. I think it was last year that Republicans blocked a law that would have given men and women, both men and women, a federal right to use contraception because they said it wasn't that it wasn't necessary. And of course, we are way behind other developed nations in our support for parents with children. through prenatal care, parental leave, childcare, and education, and healthcare. Our government has revoked tax credits and medical and food benefits that lifted millions of American children out of poverty during the worst of the COVID pandemic. And the Violence Against Women Act has to be reauthorized every 5 years. It lapsed between 2018 and 2022. So American women do have now, since 1975 or so, the right to own and inherit property, to leave harmful marriages, to seek higher education, and to enter professions that were formerly closed to them. We've made quite a lot of progress, but we still earn on average 16% less than men. And the gaps are even larger for mothers and for women who are Black, Hispanic, or Native American. These gaps have long-term financial repercussions. So we still have a lot of work to do to achieve anything like parity. So the stories that I've discussed today, the one from the Book of Numbers, the stories about Mahapajapati, underscore that we can and must work together for constructive change. It won't simply be handed down by people who control and benefit from the status quo. So I want to charge you, before I finish speaking, to take to heart the courage and determination of the women whose stories you heard today. Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milka, Tirsa, and Mahapajapati. Let them inspire all of us to work together to make life better, safer, healthier, and more conducive to spiritual growth for ourselves and for all the generations who come after us. And I want to conclude with a prayer written by Maylee Scott, which I will show you. There she is. This is her version of the metta prayer. May I be well, loving, and peaceful. May I be at ease in my body, feeling the ground beneath my seat and feet, letting my back be long and straight, enjoying breath as it rises and falls and rises. May I know and be intimate with body-mind, whatever its feeling or mood, calm or agitated, tired or energetic, irritated or friendly. Breathing in and out, aware moment by moment of the risings and passings. May I be attentive and gentle toward my own discomfort and suffering. May I be attentive and grateful for my own joy and well-being. May I move toward others freely and with openness. May I receive others with sympathy and understanding. May I move toward the suffering of others with peaceful and attentive confidence. May I recall the Bodhisattva of compassion, her 1,000 hands, her instant readiness for action, each hand with an eye in it, the instinctive knowing what to do. May I continually cultivate the ground of peace for myself and others, and persist, mindful and dedicated to this work, independent of results. May I know that my peace and the world's peace are not separate, that our peace in the world is a result of our work for justice. May all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. All right. Thank you very much. Do we have, it's close to, I think 11 your time. Do we have time for some questions?
We do, yeah, if you're open to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a few minutes.
Great. Comments, questions?
I did have a question. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit on the differences between the poems. I don't know if you kind of just wanted us to draw our own conclusions about that, but I was wondering if maybe like you were noting that the women's poems were more like relational and the men's poems were more like individual or something.
That is one of the differences. And actually, I was hunting this morning and I could not find it. If I can find it somewhere, I will send it. I used to, when I was teaching, when I was teaching college, I had a handout that had examples from the Therigatha and the Therigatha so that you could kind of see them side by side. One of the most striking differences is how the women talk about their bodies. They're very negative about their bodies. The men are not, right? And many of them are relational in terms of their concerns about or their experiences of marriage, of childbearing, of losing children, etc. And the men's poems are much more kind of da-da-da, I've done it, I've become awakened, I'm free, sort of this heroic kind of tone it's just qualitatively different. And so I will continue to see if I can find that handout and send it along for comparative purposes. But that's really kind of the difference that there are very gendered differences if you look at them closely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If you do find it, it would be wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm gonna check it out a lot on my own because I just appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anyone else?
There's a comment.
There's a comment here in the chat from Linda. Let's see. Another angle is seeing the men behind the women, those who supported the women, further strengthening my point of coming together for progress. Thank you for your kind words about the talk. Yes, you're right. It is important to see that the women had male allies and that they were working together for the collective liberation of all of them. However, it is true that the women's monastic community was very much subordinated to the male monastic community with enduring negative consequences for the women. So nuns continue to struggle much more for survival in most of the Buddhist world than monks do. So, there's work yet to be done. But I do not want to dismiss our male friends and colleagues and supporters and co-practitioners. We really are all in this together, and we need to work collectively together for the liberation of everybody. Someone's asked me if I could put a link to the metta prayer and the chapter I don't have links to them because they're not online. They're in documents on my computer, but I can send them to I can easily email them to Great Tree. Daisho, should I send them to you or Genjo?
Could you send them to info@
Yeah.
greattreetemple.org? And Rengetsu, I think if I'm remembering correctly, so over the last summer, we had a book study group on mindful politics, and I believe that essay was in that book, if I remember correctly, Reading versus Clarity of Anger.
I thought it sounded familiar. I didn't know it was the same chapter. I'm here like, wow, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
But it would be great
at
to
Great
share
Tree
out.
Zen Temple. Info at Great Tree Zen Temple. Is that what you said? .org?
Info at Great Tree Temple.
Great Tree Temple.
.org.
Okay. Clarity.
Yeah, a wonderful essay, truly.
And the metta prayer and the Therigatha handout, if I can find it. hunting through all my old class materials. Any other comments or questions?
I don't really have a question, but I really appreciated like the stories and just about like how the women were like coming together and stuff. And also just like I didn't know about the like elder nun poems, and I'm excited to check those out.
Yeah, there's nothing like it anywhere else in world religious literature that I'm aware of. Now, one thing I guess I'll mention, a little historical thing that I'll mention is that a contemporary of our Buddha was a guy named Mahavira, and he was the leader of the Jain movement in India. The Jainism is about as old as what today we call Hinduism. In its earliest stages, it was called Vedic religion. Anyway, it's a very ancient tradition. And their ethic is one of extreme non-harming, non-violence. And the Jain order did allow women to ordain. They're a very, very ascetic order. And I think that part of the Buddha's story, where he's like starving himself to death to try to overcome, desires in the body, that probably comes from the Jain tradition. When people are ordained as Jain monks and nuns, they are also made bald, but not by shaving the head. Their hair is pulled out by the roots. And their ethic of nonviolence is so great that they don't eat root vegetables, for example, because they get pulled out of the ground. They believe that everything, including insentient things like rocks, have some kind of sensory awareness. And so their value of ahimsa, non-harming, is very great. And they're not very well known because part of their tradition was to not travel very far so as to minimize the risk that they would cause harm by their traveling. They were very successful business people, as lay people, very successful because they were trusted as having a lot of integrity. And we know about them more now in the United States because many Jains have immigrated to the United States. That's how I first met people who practice in the tradition. But they did allow women to join the order from the get-go, and the nuns outnumbered the monks about 2 to 1. So the relationships between the two, Buddhism and Jainism, is another kind of interesting thing to study that I didn't learn about until I was actually teaching world religions.
I was wondering if you could talk a little more about, you mentioned there's a split between Buddhists who believe in engaged practice with the world and politics and those who don't. And even when you mentioned Jan Willis choosing between, the Black Panthers or going to study, which seems kind of like a split there. How did what is your personal experience with figuring out how to interweave that, or if you had a decision like that you had to make in the past, how do you think about it?
Thanks for that question. Well, I think I've been an activist in various ways my whole adult life. When I was in junior high and high school, we had a very large Model United Nations program here in my hometown, and I was involved in that for many years. And so I had to go learn about current affairs and write resolutions about various events and so forth as part of the Model United Nations program. I was also involved in a program called Junior Senate, and another one called Junior Statesmen of America, which is where I learned debate. And I was originally, my bachelor's degree is in political science. And I originally became a Buddhist because I did an internship in college in the state legislature working for a famously liberal politician whose name I will not say, who turned out to be a flaming asshole. Excuse me, but um, and I realized that people were getting we're not getting the best out of their legislators because many times they didn't really know what their legislators were doing. So that's why I became a journalist. And I was actually covering in 1984, Ronald Reagan, this is when I was in college, Ronald Reagan was running for reelection. The moral majority was a huge movement of evangelical Christians who came out to really support Reagan and actually got him reelected. And they held a conference in San Francisco a week before the Democratic National Convention. And I've written the story about this experience. It was a pivotal experience of my life. But they had this incredibly violent rhetoric about gay people, among other things. There was a pamphlet that they distributed that showed a little blonde girl in ponytails, kind of huddled in a corner, screaming, and a big hairy arm hovering over her with an axe. And the title of this pamphlet was Murder, Violence, and Homosexuality. And another version of this same pamphlet showed a little blonde boy being dragged into a bathroom stall. And the argument that these pamphlets made was that gay people are inherently unstable and dangerous. They are a threat to society that needs, and I'm quoting, to be neutralized. So this was horrifying to me. I had not come out at that point yet myself, but I had friends who were gay and lesbian, and I was very disturbed about this. And the kind of violence of their rhetoric, and also the violence of the protesters outside the conference who were screaming, go to hell, Falwell, Jerry Falwell, and would have probably lynched him if he'd walked out the door. And the police were also incredibly violent. And I had just started sitting meditation at Berkeley Zen Center at that point, and I did an all-day meditation retreat with Katagiri Roshi, as a matter of fact. It's the only time I ever met him. He was leading that retreat. And somebody got whacked with the kyosaku, the stick that is used to kind of wake you up during a long retreat. And the sound of it shocked me, and I started crying, and I couldn't stop. So I went to Katagiri Roshi and I said, I don't know what to do with all this political violence. And he said, we can't scream and yell and holler for peace. If we want peace in the world, we have to learn how to be it. And that was a new idea for me at 19. So I took a semester out of school, and I went off to a Buddhist temple and practiced there for several months. And at the very end of that time, I had another all-day retreat, sesshin, and at the very end of the last period of Zazen, this image came to my mind of this police officer that I had met that day at the Moral Majority Convention, who seemed like the opposite of everything that I believed was good and true and right. He was shoving people around unnecessarily, and his face was just like a stone. And he just seemed like the antithesis of me. And suddenly the boundary between us fell away. And I realized that I was who I was, where I was, doing what I was doing, because he was who he was, where he was, doing what he was doing. And that our lives were utterly inseparable. And I could also see in myself some of the same kind of self-righteousness that was motivating the people I opposed. And that was the pivot. I mean, that's really when I became a Buddhist practitioner. I mean, that was the point at which, I said, okay, here I am on this path. And I have since, I'm now a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And the Unitarians started out as Christians who rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. They believed Jesus was a great guy, but he wasn't God. And there are many Unitarians in our history, among our founding fathers. And then the Universalists were people who rejected the idea of hell. They assumed that God's love was so great that he would not send anybody to hell. And they combined forces in 1968 and became the Unitarian Universalists. And then they've become kind of post-Christian. They don't have any particular doctrine that you have to believe, but they have certain values that they promote. The most central of which is love. And the challenge of loving your enemies is no small thing, right? So an ongoing question for me is, how do I appropriately oppose what needs to be opposed, and to try to, see what's wrong, what's missing, and what needs to be corrected without hating the people who hate me, right? That's the question. I see Daisho nodding vigorously. Yeah, that is a real question. And it's not easy. And yet it is our spiritual work. So I hope that answers your question, probably at greater length than you wanted.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, I think we'll wrap up there.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wakoh. Your talk has been really wonderful. Thank you for sharing your time and energy and insight,
Thank you.
knowledge with us this morning.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be invited. It's a delight to see the Great Tree Zendo, where I remember doing a lovely retreat with students from Duke. Yeah, I had a little Build-A-Bear who had a Japanese who had little Buddhist robes that we sat on the zafu. Great.
Yeah, you can't really see her well, but Maha Pajapati sits on our altar here and
Ah,
our Zendo and Buddha halls.
well, I hope I at least offered you a few things about her that are new.
Indeed, you did. Thank
Good.
you. So we'll give back the merit as call and response, and then we'll have some announcements, and then we'll wrap up. We'll say goodbye.
Okay.
May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings,
Benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
All right, so we now have some announcements. So for people who want to sign up to receive the precepts this spring, can visit our website, which is greattreetemple.org. They can also email the registrar at info@greattreetemple for more information and so on and so forth. And upcoming events. Tomorrow, it looks like there is Introduction to Zen.
Yes.
And correct me if any of these are not accurate at this time, Genjo. Next Saturday, we have Reverend Ado Phoebe Reinhardt, who will be giving a talk. And then next Sunday, the 25th, looks like we have family meditation.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. All right. Thanks again, Reverend Wakoh. Thanks everyone for being here this morning.
Thank you all. Please take good care of yourselves, and let's all try to take care of this hurting world together.
Indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sophie.